A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime News, the podcast covering high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country every week. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. Our case this week: if a woman admits to lying and cheating people out of their life savings, should we believe her when she says, yeah, I did all of that, but I didn't kill my husband who was running the companies through which she operated the financial scam? That is exactly what a jury in West Virginia is trying to figure out right now. Did a prominent pharmacist who is currently serving time on federal charges for running a Ponzi scheme kill her husband because he was starting to suspect fraud? Prosecutors say that she allegedly injected her 38-year-old husband with insulin, and days later, the man was dead. Now, here's the thing. The man's body has been exhumed twice, and investigators have not been able to find evidence that he was injected with insulin. We're recording this on Friday, January 24th of 2025. Our guest today is Rachel Fiset, an attorney who specializes in these white-collar crimes that we're talking about today. Rachel is also a legal analyst. She's seen on many news programs. She's a dear friend of the show, and Rachel is here to help us figure this case out. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, always a pleasure to see you. Always a pleasure. So, Rachel, at the heart of one of the parts of this criminal case is the Ponzi scheme, and then the motivation of perhaps a secret being revealed as the reason for murder. But that, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and I'm not sure how strong it is.
I agree. I'm having a hard time. And this case is fascinating, Anna, because it is going on now. So the trial is happening as we sit here. So we don't actually know what a jury is going to do, but it gives us some really strong reflection without knowing an answer at the end as we work through this case.
So this one is complicated, not just because of the financial crimes, but also because of the murder allegations and also the evidence, so-called evidence, that's being presented by the prosecution. This case is out of Beckley, West Virginia. Natalie Cochran, who's 43 years old, she was a successful pharmacist. She apparently had a knack, though, for conning people out of their money, more than $2 million, say federal authorities. She was apparently the brains behind a Ponzi scheme, which lured people in, including family members, to invest in two companies. I guess she and her husband ran these companies that had nothing to do with pharmaceuticals. That's what's so interesting to me. A state trooper actually testified this week that the husband, from his perspective, now this state trooper is a family friend. That's why he's very interesting, right? Because he's a sworn officer, but also a friend of the family. And he says that the husband had no idea about the Ponzi scheme and the financial crimes. But of course, we're never going to know what her husband, Michael Cochran, actually knew, because he died at the age of 38, mysteriously, just as the scam was unraveling. They say that the Ponzi scheme, federal authorities say she stole about $2 million and that they had assets in worth $500 million. And they had been also getting, I don't know, if bank loans, which, augmented this very luxurious lifestyle. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that the $2.5 million number that the feds are able to tout that she stole is probably very low, which is not that unusual when there is a resolution to a criminal case. And so I think the 2.5 number is probably inaccurate. She probably stole a lot more than that. They recovered so many assets from her home, including a Shelby car, which is a very fancy old Mustang. And so there was a lot of assets, a lot of fancy trips, a lot of properties, and they had a real live Ponzi scheme going where they were representing that they were government contractors, and then they were convincing friends, family, and beyond to invest in their government contracting business, which really didn't exist.
Because they didn't have any government contracts.
Correct.
Right. And I'm still trying to figure out why that's such a valuable thing. Like, why would I invest in something because you have a government contract? What does that mean to me?
So I also agree with you. I think that's an unusual Ponzi scheme idea. I have dealt with a lot of Ponzi schemes in my time, both on behalf of victims and on behalf of accused Ponzi schemers. And usually it's a little more concrete in what people might understand. I'm involved in one right now where my clients thought they owned the rights to various movies like Spider-Man, things you've heard of, to the tune of $50 million. But a government contracting scheme is a little different in that it feels less tangible, and there's a lot of regulations that go into government contracting. So if you're holding yourself out as a government contractor, now you're actually subject to more regulations. Yes, you have specific privileges if you are a government contractor, but there are those things are regulated by the government who can contract. So I feel like it's an unusual Ponzi scheme narrative that she was really touting to her investors.
Do you find her unusual as at the head of a Ponzi scheme? Like, she's already admitted to this. There's been a plea deal. And as you said, they agreed to the $2.5 million and likely, she stole more than that. Do you find she's a pharmacist?
I mean, you never know who's going to be the head of various types of schemes. And you actually never know how schemes start. In a way, these can start in a very legitimate way with people starting a business, getting investors, and they never anticipate where they're going to end up because it's little things here and there. They get in financial trouble. So they designate money in a way that they're not allowed to, thinking, oh, I'll just make up for that later with the new investor. So, I mean, a Ponzi scheme by nature is a triangle where the investors are paying off the investor level just below them. But a lot of times that's a genuine thought when you're starting out. You're not starting out as a Ponzi schemer.
Interesting. Well, prosecutors claim that she poisoned her husband with too much insulin. She has pleaded not guilty. She is currently on trial for her husband's murder. And where we are in the case as of today's recording is that the defense is presenting their version of events. So when this podcast comes out on Tuesday, it's possible we may be getting to closing arguments. I'm not sure it'll be in the jury's hands by the time this podcast drops. But these are pretty much the main points of the case and of the defense, the counter to everything. So a little background here. Natalie and Michael Cochran were married for 19 years, and they shared 2 children. They lived in a very upscale area of West Virginia. Natalie worked as a pharmacist, and they ran these 2 businesses, which appeared to be successful. According to the federal indictment, Natalie's investor fraud began in June of 2017. Both Natalie and her husband were owners and operators of these 2 companies, one called Technology Management Solutions, TMS, and Tactical Solutions Group. TMS was an IT company that allegedly provided technology consulting and services, and TSG was a wholesale merchant of durable goods. Boy, what the heck does that mean, durable goods?
I think they're selling pretty mundane items at that point. Durable goods could mean a lot of things, but it generally means boring business.
Boring business, yes. Well, not so boring if you pull back the curtain, I would say. So she promised her investors huge returns. Michael's parents, her in-laws, were also victims of this scheme, and they invested the majority of their life savings. This is what I find interesting about this part. Is it your experience that Ponzi schemers, do they go after their family members, or do they insulate their family members?
Most of the time when I have had experience with those alleged to have be involved in Ponzi schemes, their families are involved. So they do involve family members, be it cousins, or even parents, close members. A lot of times, like I said, these are not starting out with the intention of defrauding people. That is truly been my experience, is the intention to defraud is not there. So they immediately get their close families and friends involved in the business because they think it's a great idea. It's when things start going south, where the business isn't successful, and they have bills to pay off or a lifestyle to maintain, that the scheme evolves. So I would say most schemes don't start off, and that's certainly not the rule, but don't start off as a Ponzi scheme.
Interesting. Unless you're a career con man or woman, right?
Correct.
So here you have an educated professional, if you will, in a completely different area of her expertise getting involved in this business. That's very interesting. That's really interesting that whether this was the intention from the beginning or whether they found themselves in a hole and in constantly trying to dig themselves out made it so much worse. And that's how the Ponzi scheme evolved. 11 victims have been identified, 2.5 million, as we said. Natalie continued to raise money not only through the investors, and then some of them would, get a little payback and be like, oh, yeah, this is working out. But she also raised cash advances from at least 3 financial institutions. And then everything starts to unravel in July of 2019. She files for bankruptcy. Never a good sign. But this is the part I don't understand as part of this indictment, and maybe you can help me with this. She did not list any of her investors as creditors at the time. She only listed herself as the only debitor. So what does that mean?
So that is interesting. So in a bankruptcy, usually your company goes bankrupt, and the reason that happens is you can't pay back all of your debts. And so from an investor standpoint, they're not necessarily always creditors because you have to owe them money. So if you're a true investor, you're rising and falling with the company in some way. So it's not always considered a debt. So I would guess that's my best guess as to why she only listed herself, meaning she put in her own money separate and apart from the company where she is expecting a payout. I'm not going to say this is not a shady way to list folks, because certainly the banks that loaned her money, for instance, those are loans. Those are not investments. They are absolutely creditors to her fallen company.
Every year, people set all kinds of New Year's goals. Maybe yours is to lose weight or to finally clean out your garage. But did you know that only 8% of people will stick with their resolutions all year long? That's right, 8%. But I have an easy New Year's resolution for you that is simple to keep and won't take up much time. With Acorns, you can lock in years and years of healthy money habits in just 5 minutes. That's all the time it takes to open your account and start automatically saving and investing your money so it has a chance to grow. I've set many resolutions over the years, and I know that it's hard to always stick with them. But with Acorns, it's simple to build a routine while you've still got that fresh start feeling. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money has a chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you invest with the spare money that you've got right now. And you can start with $5 or even just your spare change. It's so important to invest and plan for your future. I know that it can seem hard to get started, but truly, Acorns make it simple. It's a great way to begin investing in your future. Head to acorns.com/truecrime or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risks. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/truecrime. So while the Ponzi scheme and the finances are all unraveling, Michael Cochran mysteriously gets ill and he passes ultimately. He passes out at the family house and he's hospitalized on February 6th of 2019 with severely low glucose levels. Here is what I believe is going to be the central part of the murder case based on the testimony that we've seen so far. And this is the circumstantial part, the part that doesn't make sense, right? Like if someone passes out, you go to the hospital. But apparently prosecutors say she delayed in getting Michael to the hospital, that she thought he would sleep it off or snap out of it. Prosecutors say, and there are witnesses also who have testified, that she called friends to help to say Michael's not well before she reached out, for example, to take him to the hospital. You know, and she's a pharmacist, so it's not like she has no concept of the human body and illnesses.
I think, obviously this is a very bad fact for her. She can defend it in some way that, it looked like something that would be common to him, or I believed, based on my knowledge, that this is something that he would snap out of after he was able to sleep or rest. But it does show knowledge. She knew he was very ill and left him there. So,
yeah. So there's a friend of Natalie's, Jennifer Davis. She has testified that Natalie messaged her on the morning that Michael is feeling ill, that he's passed out, claiming that she and Michael are both very ill, but they're too ill to get to a doctor. So now she's in the middle of this thing and claiming, she makes a passing reference about maybe insulin would help. Again, she is a pharmacist, so maybe if she said something like that, it would come as, a person who knows what they're saying, I suppose. I don't know. So Jennifer has a child who has a need for insulin. And then the friend testified that her husband delivered a bottle of insulin to the Cochran household, supposedly to help Natalie. But that's very suspicious, right? Like, what do you make of that?
These facts really cut both ways in my mind. She's a pharmacist. She has access to insulin. If she had a plan in some ways, she might have stolen it. So to me, that might, because of her access, because of her job, if it was a premeditated murder, in some ways, I think she could argue, I would have had the insulin on hand to kill him. I would not have asked my friend for it. Now, that's one argument. And I think the prosecution side could say differently. You didn't want to get caught for stealing. You didn't want to risk your job. You didn't want to see, you didn't want that aspect of taking the insulin home to poison him. So you called your friend in a very innocent way, knowing that they had insulin on hand and knowing that they would be helpful and setting up your defense that you needed it.
That's such a great point. She's a pharmacist. She could get her hands on anything, and she could probably get her hands on just a little bit of anything without anybody even really noticing. And if anyone would know what would and wouldn't be detectable and what the side effects of anything, whether we're talking about insulin or, the drug of choice that we've seen so often, not saying it's in this case, is eye drops, all of these things, she would absolutely know. It's It's fascinating. Now, here's another part that is very interesting about the day that Michael passed out. According to the testimony of a family friend who happens to be a state trooper, John Hamilton, he visited the Cochran household that day and thought that Michael should be transported to the hospital. However, he says Natalie thought it would be better if he slept it off. How valuable is he as a witness?
Again, these facts cut both ways. This is a hard case for the prosecution, even though they have somebody who will universally be seen as definitely morally questionable. And I think the defense ate that in their opening. Like, look, we know she's a criminal. That fact, the same as the last, the straight trooper was there. If he looked to be in extreme distress, I feel like he would have called 911. So That's another defense for her, was like, hey, other people saw him. They didn't do anything either.
Such a good point, Rachel. Yes. So when Michael finally does get admitted to the hospital, he has a glucose level of 21, with the normal ranges being between 80 and 100. Severely low levels could be an indication of a massive dose of insulin. So his brain started to swell, and 5 days later, he died. The cause of death, severe brain swelling caused by hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. So that's the cause of death, but we don't know the origin of the insulin. The timing of Michael's death, this one probably goes towards the prosecution's point of view on this one. They had some financial meetings and issues that they were dealing with at the time, and apparently they had a meeting with the Bank of America on the day that Michael collapsed. And so that meeting had to be delayed. They even had a plane chartered for this meeting. It's a lot of money to charter.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
So yeah, this is certainly an over $2.5 million Ponzi scheme. And once you're meeting with the bank, so the bank is on to them, is my guess. And the bank is, there's likely an investigation, because what happens in these cases is investors start to complain, and they start to complain openly, and they often will get a lawyer, depending on their amount of investment. And they might sue civilly. And so there's threats to sue civilly. They call the bank. Once, if there is some sort of civil case pending at all, they subpoena the bank closes the accounts. Things become very messy. And because the banks are also involved in giving them money, they are meeting with them, and they are like, hey, when are we getting our loans repaid? Where is this money? We're hearing rumors. Here's what's going on. And yeah, she does not want to take that meeting. So this is, in the prosecution's corner, a potential motivation for for his murder.
So Michael dies February of 2019. And then in September of that same year, a grand jury returns a multi-count indictment on the financial fraud part of this. She eventually accepts a guilty plea on the federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering. And in early 2021, she is sentenced to 135 months in prison, and as part of the deal, forced to pay over $2 million in restitution to her victims, and to forfeit all the assets that were obtained through this fraudulent scheme, including $45,000 that was pulled from one of the accounts. But this would not be the end of it. So think of it in the timeline. Michael is passed. She's filed for bankruptcy. Now she's charged with this Ponzi scheme and these financial frauds. But she hasn't been charged with Michael's murder. Michael is passed. Michael has been buried, right? Family's grieving Michael's loss. Now, while she's dealing with these federal charges, she then gets indicted for murdering her husband. That happens in November of 2021. But here's the part that is just so confusing. Prosecutors drop the charges in April of 2023. This poor man's body has been exhumed 2 times. And there's really no expert on either side who can say conclusively that the man was injected with insulin. And if he was injected with a high dose of insulin, who did it? Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's as important a fact, or do you think that that's a weakness, or what do you make of that?
I think the prosecution has a difficult case. I mean, and I think they recognized it the first time around with like, how are we going to win this? We don't have the facts. We think she did it. Look, we think she's bad. We think she had motivation. We don't like her and we think she did it, but they don't have the facts to back it up in beyond a reasonable doubt, perhaps. So at that point, I think realizing that, they dropped the charges, but continued investigating.
Correct. And then in October, just a few months later, they charge her again with Michael's murder. And that brings us to today, to the month of January in 2025, because that is when the trial started in earnest on January 15th of this month. So this is a very confusing case for me. It really is. I realize prosecutors don't have to prove motive as part of their case, but I've always believed that if the motive is fairly clear, it does help a jury to understand what happened here. Did this person do this? So let's get back to this whole issue of the insulin and the direct evidence that seems to be missing here, because I think this is really a really important part of this. So the prosecution says, look, Michael was relatively healthy, 200 pounds, 38-year-old man, bodybuilder, so he shouldn't have died. That's basically what they're saying, in addition to the part that is very fuzzy to prove. Now, here's the defense. The defense is saying, okay, look, like you've said, Natalie may be a cheat, she may be a liar, she may be a lot of things, but she's not a murderer. And here's the thing. Was he or was he not complicit in the Ponzi scheme? We don't know that. The prosecution says he didn't know anything, right? But the defense is saying, for heaven's sakes, his name was listed as one of the owners, for each of these companies. He didn't have any other job. Like, how did you not know? That's what the defense is saying. Oh, he knew. She didn't kill him because he was learning the truth. He knew because he was in on it. Like, what do you do with this? The man is dead.
So in everyday life, I always think we have no idea what goes on behind closed doors between a husband and a wife. And I absolutely think of this in my own practice quite often. And sometimes I am actually let in behind closed doors, because you often meet when one spouse is in trouble, both spouses are dealing with that. And what I'm imagining was going on at home, and this is pure speculation, is that he knew something was wrong. He probably knew most of it. I generally think that is a possibility, particularly given his involvement in this business. It doesn't look like she was running it on her own. Now, like I said, many of these businesses start very legitimately. So at home, what could have been happening is he's saying, we're caught, we've made mistakes, let's do what we can to come clean. You got us into this mess. This is not what I signed up for. I think we should go to the authorities or go bankrupt or something. They are, in my mind, they are fighting like crazy at home, whether or not she murdered him, because this is a stressful time. Things are coming to a head. They are about to meet with the bank. They file bankruptcy not so much later, but things come to a head much earlier than we see them, or that the feds get involved. So things are coming to a head about the scheme. Their investors are getting mad, et cetera. I'm imagining they're fighting. So what I think the prosecution has in this case is actually they probably can show motive. I think that scenario is not so hard to imagine, that this couple is in disagreement on how to move forward in the trouble that they're currently in. And they know a train of trouble is coming their way. And that could set up extreme consequences, extreme disagreement, and finger pointing. And so I think the motive in this case is the best thing the prosecution has.
Fascinating. And the other thing about that meeting that they were supposed to have with Bank of America the day that Michael collapsed, one of two things could have happened at that meeting. He obviously knew that there was a meeting, right? So the question is, did he at that point know how bad things were? Or were things about to be revealed to him in that meeting, and maybe she'd been in contact with the bank, and then in this meeting, everything was going to be laid out on the table? I don't know. I do find the timing of that, for me, among the most suspicious here. Of all the days for Michael to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the days. But it could also be if he legitimately collapsed, not because he was injected with insulin or anything else. That's a heck of a lot of stress. If you're about to meet with the bank and you think everything's coming down, stress is one thing, insulin is another. But again, I find the timing of that to be fascinating. So let's talk about his health, because to me, this is really interesting. Apparently, he was a bodybuilder, and so he supposedly took steroids, which of course absolutely destroys your body. Very unhealthy, very dangerous. And there's a contractor who has testified, Jason Bowen. He worked for the Cochrans, and he also visited the home on February 6th. How many people are going into the Cochran home on the day that Michael passes out? You have a state trooper who's a friend. You have the contractor. You have the family member with, who has the child that needs insulin. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
So Jason Bowen, the contractor, is there, and he claims that Natalie had called him to the house because Michael was suffering from an illness. I don't know what I call the contractor. Unless you need someone very big to help you move a 200-pound bodybuilder, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe.
That's a thought. Okay. Yes.
So Jason testified that Michael was unresponsive when he arrived. That is not good. Like, that's serious. One thing is to be, I don't feel good. The other one's like not answering questions and not even awake. According to Jason, he was aware of Michael's previous medical incidents. He was never told the specifics. However, Michael allegedly complained to him about dizzy spells, feeling not well before his death, telling the contractor, this is what the contractor testifies, that Michael said he felt like he had been poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
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 Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bad fact.
That's a bad one.
That's a bad one.
Yeah. Yeah. And the FBI, the FBI chemist has testified that as a result of a search warrant on the Cochran home, they found 3 vials which contained insulin and a steroid. So we know why the steroid would be there. But the question would be, why is the insulin there? Who needs insulin?
Well, I believe steroids do have some effect on how your body produces insulin. So I think, it's where the defense case is just starting. I wonder if they will put up a medical expert that will talk about that. But that feels like a viable theory in some way, that I believe his children really did drive home the amount of steroid use that was going on in the home. Supplements, really, this man was deeply into his body and his strength in what sounds like an unhealthy way. And I think, that leads to other issues. He's 38. How long has this steroid abuse been going on? What are the lasting effects? We know there are some. I think a medical expert, if I was on the defense side, would really help in these ways, clear up some of these questions, or at least make the jury ask additional questions as to taking, kind of deflecting from her. But I think, these are a mixed bag of facts. This is a mixed bag of facts for the prosecution and defense.
Yeah. And the defense has said already, in these opening arguments, that Michael was not the portrait of health. He may have been a bodybuilder and have looked, really like a strong guy. Apparently, he'd been hospitalized on multiple occasions prior to his death. So if they can, of course, substantiate all of that, it really makes us think, okay, that's really something for a jury to weigh. Mm-hmm. When you have the victim here, the person who has passed, how significant the use of steroids were on his body and his health, and if that indeed was the contributing factor to his illness, and what if, when his wife, the pharmacist, thinks that maybe insulin will help him because maybe he's having a reaction. It'll be interesting to see if she takes the stand.
Right. Well, I think the issue is real. I think that insulin and steroids are connected. And maybe she premeditated it that way, and she knew this would be, she knows these things. She is a pharmacist. She is aware of your body's interactions. Like this really is the thing, this is what she knows. So it is difficult, again, to say, even if she gave him insulin, even if that was what happened, if she was trying to help him or not, as he lay non-responsive on the floor.
Yeah. And then with all these people in and out of the house, and your point to any one of them could have called an ambulance. So maybe her decision not to was supported by the inaction of the others.
I agree. I mean, say it's negligent homicide. Say she didn't give him insulin and she just let him die on the floor. I mean, that's one theory. They're not supporting that theory, but they're saying she let him stay longer than he should have. Well, other people were there. They're testifying. They saw it.
Including a state trooper.
Who should probably have his eye out for public safety.
Yeah. Wow. It's an incredible case. It really is. It's very complicated. It's a little different than what we usually cover, only because it's like the two separate cases, the financial fraud, the murder allegation, and then where the two come together.
It's a very interesting case. Very interesting. I mean, Alex Murdaugh, it makes me think of the Murdaugh case. Yes.
Yes. I was thinking that last night, Rachel, as I was going through this. Mm-hmm. I'm like, wow. It's like that. Everyone's still asking, like, why did he kill his wife and his son? And everyone's like, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so he was out of money and there was all this, all this fraud. But why did you have to kill them? Because it was about to be revealed and he wasn't thinking straight. Yeah, crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So we, of course, are watching this case. If Natalie is convicted of murder, she will face a potential life sentence. But remember, she is currently serving a federal sentence, which is she's not going to be eligible to get out until January of 2030. So even if she's found not guilty, Natalie's not going anywhere.
That's right. And she'd probably prefer to be in federal court than state court at this point if she is convicted. So she would finish out her federal sentence and then start a state sentence if that is what happens if she is convicted.
Yeah. All right. We'll keep tabs on this one. It is time for our comments section. These are the crime cases that you all are talking about on social media. And here's our producer, Will Updike. Hey, Will.
Hey, Anna, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks, Rachel. Always good to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right. So this week we have a case of a very suspicious attempt to appear inconspicuous. This case comes out of Melbourne, Florida, where a routine traffic stop revealed a woman with a bag that said definitely not a bag full of drugs. And surprise, surprise, according to police, the bag was in fact full of drugs. So according to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, this all unfolded after a traffic stop on January 19th, when the officer noticed a U-Haul driving without lights. Already a little suspicious, not a great start there. So they pull over the truck, and the deputy, they had a canine dog with them at the time. They were given permission to search the car by the driver. The driver claimed that there was, nothing illegal inside. So the passenger is our suspect here, and this is who we're going to really be getting into. Taryn Ackery. She apparently had a couple of bags with her, one of which was this bag that read, definitely not a bag full of drugs. I'll show a picture. It's in like kind of a little cutesy script, it seems like something kind of fun and ironic, especially if you're not using it for that purpose. But police say it was very much a bag of drugs. So they say inside this bag, there was 8 grams of meth, baggies and scales, needles, and Narcan, along with other drug paraphernalia. So they arrest her on charges of possession of methamphetamine with the intent to sell and the possession of drug paraphernalia. There's a little bit of a precursor to this story, though, that I want to get into that I don't know for sure, but it might have inspired the alleged use of this bag. So according to records, Taryn had been arrested in Melbourne just a couple weeks earlier on January 6th, and she was again a passenger in a vehicle that was pulled over by deputies. And when the deputies responded, they also had a canine dog with them on this one. I don't know if that's just a thing there in Melbourne. If they
what
always
are the
got
chances of that happening?
I have no idea. I don't know. Yeah, it was very bizarre that it's like the exact same set of circumstances. But when this car gets pulled over, the canine alerts to the presence of drugs. So the cops conduct a search, and apparently within her purse, they allegedly found 14.5 grams of meth. So for that previous arrest, she was booked on charges of methamphetamine possession with intent to sell and possession of drug paraphernalia, similar charges. Now, she eventually bonded out on a bond of about $15,500. And this kind of caused some consternation, both with the sheriff's office, and I saw on Facebook, there were some people like from the local community there who were like kind of frustrated at what they saw was this low bond. So where she's at now is her bond is currently revoked with the second arrest, in around a 10-day span. But the sheriff there sort of expressed that they thought it was unlikely that she would not receive bond, and it might be something similar. So that's something that we'll watch and maintain. A lot of bad luck. I don't know how you sort of, get into the same situation like that twice, but I can see how maybe you thought things would go differently if the bag was labeled differently. I don't know.
I have a feeling no matter what the outside of that bag said, that they were going to be searching, especially with a canine dog. The canine dog doesn't read the bag. It smells the bag. It doesn't get the humor.
No, it does not get the humor. And also, I think it depends on, it's all circumstantial, like, whether or not this method would work. But in this one where the canine is already hit, you're not in a good spot. You're not in a good spot. But people had a lot to say on this one. American Cryptid said it's always the one you least suspect, which I'm going to show, I'll show the mugshot for our listeners. It's, it's a woman. She's getting in her mugshot. It's clearly one of the worst days, but I don't know what she looked like pre-picture, but she looks a little bit of a mess. I mean, it's maybe not the most inconspicuous look if you were trying to fly under the radar for having drugs. Riley asked reverse psychology, which I guess that was the intent. I'm so curious though at what point this bag was purchased. Because there's only about 10 days between the arrest and this one. I don't think this is something that you could find in a local shop. So is that
come on. I'm sure you could
find
find this online. It sounds like a little Etsy thing.
Yeah. Well, somebody else said, Jules B said the bag came from Temu, which is definitely possible. I don't know if they can ship it in 10 days though. Sometimes those stuff takes so long. And we'll end this one on a quote from Philomosity, who said, someone should have told her it only works if you don't look like you're on drugs. And even then it's a toss up. And yeah, I kind of like what Ana said. It's, if the dog is already on there, your chances are not good. I just don't get it. Rachel, are there some areas where there's just always a canine with the officer? I'm not quite sure on this. It just seems within a 10-day period to be such a unique set of repeated circumstances.
Oh, it's pretty good. I'm from Florida, so I always enjoy when you start a story with this one's out of Florida. But there's probably a pretty known drug situation occurring in this area. Sounds like she's probably not so far from the meth lab, and that they sell those bags there just to really throw people off the trail.
Or it's a gift with purchase. Gift with purchase.
I hadn't thought about that.
Right?
Maybe it's like a perk. You get the tote bag from NPR, you get this bag from, your local supplier. But that is going to do it for this week's comment section. I want to thank everybody who left those over on our YouTube community page. You can also reach out to us anytime or across all social media at My True Crime News. And until next time, don't do crime.
So fun. We'll find some incredible cases. It's always so revealing of human nature, and human nature is always surprising.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Good. I love his cases.
Yeah. And it's like, and then when we look at the more serious, deeper cases, it's always it always comes down to human nature. It's like, what would you do in this situation? Oftentimes, I always say this, we have strife in our life. We have financial problems. We have, divorces, relationships that don't work out, or secrets that are going to be revealed. But most of us just deal with it. What are you going to do? Murder is not an option.
Right.
But for some it is. Rachel, it's been such a pleasure having you on. It's always great to see you. Where can people find you or follow you?
I'm on my law firm website at zfclaw.com or on Instagram at lawandrachel.
Excellent. You can find me at Ana G News. You can find everything that we do, one footprint, My True Crime News. This episode, all our episodes, wherever you get your podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a vibrant community there. Can't wait to hear your comments on today's case. What do you think was going on in the Cochran household? And of course, sign up to receive our newsletter at truecrimenews.com. So until next week, I'm your host, Ana Garcia, and this is True Crime News, the podcast.